I'll start with a poem from the collection. It's one that I always think of as kind of like a strange sort of personal benediction, despite kind of the quirky subject matter, because it's about Mr. Rogers. And it's one I was looking back at again today, thinking about, and then finally, like as Gina and I were kind of chatting about the way that our homes have become these worlds and these sort of machines to us, like kind of like a car that you had to work on for the first time for some of you, and you're looking at little parts of it and you're kind of getting to know it in strange ways. I was thinking about this with this Mr. Rogers poem because when I was a kid watching that show, one of the things that always struck me about the intro was the very machine-like setup of the apartment. The way that the train comes in and the train comes out, and there's this very ritualized, like somebody who's extremely adept at using like a particular tool. It's kind of how I always saw Mr. Rogers kind of using the set of his apartment. So I kind of wrote a poem inspired by that and kind of reflecting on domesticity in that way, extended over time. And it's called As Mr. Rogers Prays to His Aquarium. As the kingdom we imagine has a train, and the train has a station in our house, as the glass spun gold with you who swim your lives together, as the gold of our life to come, as every new flake draws another mouth to the surface of the water, as each ripple is not sound but hunger, as the difference between silence and the word after, as these are our words: circle, stillness, spiral, pause. Every new day is a machine of transformation, even the newest dead, as though the water held us moving by the wire of, as one drawn to another by the wire of, another whirl in the spiral, another arm, a new line drawn in the palm. This poem is written after a line by the poet Carrie Webster. I think it's from her collection Grand and Arsenal, although it could be wrong, but I hope it's from Grand and it's from a poem in Grand and Arsenal, because I wrote the poem at the corner of Grand Street and Arsenal Street in St. Louis, which is what the collection is named after, that particular intersection, at a coffee house called Mokabee's, which is, if you're ever in St. Louis, 100% go by there. It's called, something I want to explain before I actually get into the poem too. It incorporates a dream that my wife told me that she had. She was away on a sabbatical in San Juan, Puerto Rico at the time, and she told me while she was there she'd had this dream where we had a daughter who was already, I think, like 7 years old or something. And I kind of incorporated that detail into the poem. It's called What a Weird Tenor This World Is, How It Lends the Appearance of Appearing Like Something Else, after a line by Carrie Webster. The little kid drives a toy cab whose body is a grocery cart that his father is pushing. The little kids next door sashay through the tank of an above-ground pool. Every little kid is learning to have a singing voice, to lose it. Various collisions like dishes being washed, the splash of toy brass, boy soprano. When you came home from San Juan, you said you had a dream of our bodies combined in a little girl. This was just momentary. The little kid's blinded cry in the Marco Polo game. For the rest of her life, she will shut her eyes and call out the same name, confusing the answer with the touch of a place where she can go no further. This is all just a catalog of appearances, and most will be. Before the last word, a question asked by a passing man. Light obsessively polishes the two rare nickels of his irises. Our faces are shy in different ways. The last word is forgotten. This poem was written at another poetry reading I was at. I know it can be rude to write while somebody else is reading, but I think that sometimes you do it anyway. I've seen other people do it, so I don't feel too bad. And although for the poem, I kind of changed it from a poetry reading to a concert. And it came because at this particular moment that I was at this reading, the poet had mentioned that she was sort of doing her reading for her book, sort of touring her book. And while she was touring her book, she was kind of planning her touring route so that she could end up in Denver, because that's where her mother was, and her mother was in hospice, so she had to be with her. And this was at a moment when my mom had started being more frequently hospitalized for some chronic health conditions that she has been dealing with for several years. And so the confluence of our anxieties and fears around that, and the idea of distance, because my mother lives and still lives in the state of Kentucky, kind of brought this poem out. It's called At the Beginning of the Concert. The singer explains that she is on her way to Boulder to watch her mother die. Then what is the maraschino cherry in Jason's Manhattan, bathed by the liquor's ice water honey? What is she doing here, singing? What is it to her, to me, to be with her? What is it to her or me? Is it like the back porch last week budded with ladybugs, hungry to winter? The ceilings and the posts and the railings stain of black flecked redness, the spraying of pheromones, if thickening is another way to gather fortune. Everything dies on a wave. If at the peak rides superfluous sugar, the waves valley flowering with clapping, as the lyric's last note tapers to low hills, goldenrod. If this is the applause, this is the applause. The syrup thick, blood thick preservative. The singer blood, singing another song in which the mother is bathing, like a single unspoiled fruit. I'm going to tonally shift gears a little bit and read a couple of darker, weirder poems from the book. I'm going to start with the first one in the collection, which is also probably the oldest poem in the collection. I wrote it in 2009. That was the first draft. And I wrote it about and while I was on shift at a gas station where I was working right after I graduated from college. It was the time of the year when starlings start to sort of gather and kind of make that sort of starling cloud that they do in trees before they kind of waft away suddenly and very mysteriously and very beautifully and also kind of disturbingly. So I wrote that at the time while I was working at this gas station, and I think I was also thinking a lot about the idea of scarcity and sort of I think one of the buzzwords at that time was peak oil, and I think that plays into some of the underlying fears in this poem. Not that we would run out of oil, but that we're so deeply reliant on this thing that we're kind of sucking out of the earth. Augury. Reader in your dark red car. The starlings hear the dwindle. They hear the nozzles of a service station's blue pumps rasp. The grease trucks filling up behind a neighboring diner. See every sign raised high on its pole. Read them this way. They sing to one another in the tree that overhangs the world's flat roofs, adjust their feathers like a bevy of hatchets. Read them this way. The starlings smell famine nearby and trouble coming the way someone tracking through woods smells rot in the dark, and know there is a time to eat and a time for exile, that nothing works here but blood and radio. Murmuration. They unfurl against a low sky into an open script. And know it is time for you, the sky in dusk and sign-starred, wondrous. Get out, lock your doors, get scissors and net, climb a ladder and haul starlings from the wind. Split their caustic chests, track where the steam drifts in the light. And do I have time for one more? Because I just want to leave one more, but I do want to read one of the sort of titular poems of the collections. It's a series of poems that I have all kind of share the name of Death Metal Pastoral. My effort at what the poet Joelle McSweeney calls necropastorals, where it's like a pastoral poem. It's involved with the fascination with nature and naturalness. That's kind of always been prevalent in poetry, but interested in sort of the darker side. She's really obsessed when she talks about necropastoral with the idea kind of things that ooze, and how like oozing things and leaking things and decaying things are kind of integral to the pastoral, especially in like a moment where things are just going to kind of more poisonously ooze and leak the less we do about the kind of eco-catastrophe we're living under. And so I kind of wrote from that, thinking also not just about the natural world, but some of its intersections with kind of class and despair. And this is one of the Death Metal Pastorals, kind of subtitled, "The Swain Who Was on the Cusp of Somewhere." Furrows once rode with tall stalks of tobacco, my bone marrow, the scarecrow absent field. Black barn full of wooden stakes and straw, smell of ghost smoke from a 20 years ago harvesting, burning crop of disease. On the other side of the stone wall border, burn pile piled high with the viscera of uselessness, the ribbing, the limbs, the old upholstery. My burn pile's employer, the master of the field. You can see him in summer by the garden fired up with sun. I am twigs of angel's trumpet fallen. When I was a boy, I wore the flowers of the tree on my fingers, wore them as claws, a monster of petals. My life's with my ex. My ex is a sweet gum, shells and star leaves scattered on the lawn. I am just a spectator, an advocate documenting the loss. I yank out all the weeds, I gather them up, then I am in a pickup headed for the branches threshed by the thunderstorm, wheels churning to the blast beat, death drums in the tape deck. I want to burn the trees and I want to burn the enemies, infecting the roots in an instant. Where am I? Where am I in the field that I give my will over to you? Thanks.